Who is the real Erika Kirk?
Sex sells, babe.
Sex sell.
Wow.
That's me.
Erika Kirk really thought she had everything locked in tight, like no loose ends anywhere, cutting off insiders, pushing out anyone who might talk, and controlling the story from every angle she could reach. But now, new claims popping up are saying she got it seriously wrong in a big way. Because the pressure building right now is not coming from some former employee she didn't like, and it's not from some outside critic with an obvious agenda either. What people are starting to say, from multiple sides, is that the one getting ready to speak up is actually someone from Erika's own inner circle, someone who has been close to her for years, not just casually around, but really close, and reportedly knows enough to explain how Charlie Kirk was allegedly treated like a pawn in a much bigger move to take control of everything he built. And if even part of these claims are true, this could be the kind of leak that flips everything upside down because outsiders are easy to brush off. You can always say former employees are just upset or critics have some political angle. That's the usual move. But when it's your best friend of 15 years stepping forward with direct knowledge of what really went on behind closed doors, that hits completely different. That is someone who was actually there, someone who saw how things really played out, and for whatever reason has now decided staying quiet is no longer an option. Now, before getting into that major reveal, look at what has already been happening inside Turning Point USA. Because the staffing situation alone is raising serious eyebrows once you really pay attention to it. The speed and pattern of people leaving is not random at all, and since Erika stepped into the CEO role, multiple observers are calling it house cleaning on an industrial scale. And that says a lot. People were getting pushed out nonstop, fast and back to back, and it didn't feel like normal restructuring at all. It looked way more like a targeted move to remove anyone whose loyalty was with Charlie instead of Erika. Sources are even claiming that Erika herself talked about clearing out what she called the Charlie fan, and that phrase alone is raising serious questions. What that supposedly means is the people inside the organization who built everything around Charlie's original vision, his values, and the direction he set for Turning Point. These were not random staff. These were people deeply connected to how things were supposed to run from the start. And if that description is even close to accurate, then this is not some emotional reshuffle after a leadership change. This starts looking like a calculated wipe of institutional memory, a move to remove the exact people who would notice the shift, who would speak up about how different things are becoming compared to when Charlie was leading it. And that kind of shift does not go unnoticed, especially by people who were there from the inside. One name that keeps coming up again and again in all of this is Aubrey Locke.
I've spoken with classmates, past boyfriends, and people are generally bewildered as to why Erika is now publicly representing.
The story around how she allegedly lost her role after 4 years is the kind of situation that really exposes what the internal culture might look like right now. Because the reported reason for her exit sounds almost unreal, like something that should not even make sense. But here's the thing. Multiple sources are describing the same situation with very specific details, which makes it harder to just brush it off or ignore it. And the way the story is being told starts like this. A senior figure at Turning Point USA gets into a taxi cab. The driver, just making normal small talk, brings up that his daughter's friend works at the organization. Nothing unusual at all. What happens next is described as a completely casual, off-the-record vent session, the kind of conversation people have every day with strangers when they talk about work stress. There was nothing official being shared, no secrets, no inside strategy, no leaks at all, just someone speaking honestly about how a lot of staff were not feeling great about the new management, which, based on everything being said about the environment inside, is not shocking in any way. But according to the version of events being passed around, that one simple comment somehow turned into something much bigger than it should have been. That one moment, just a casual remark in a taxi, reportedly traveled from the driver's memory to someone else and eventually got traced back to Aubrey. And that alone was apparently enough to end her 4-year run with the organization. She was allegedly identified as the person connected to the driver's daughter and then let go. Sources are saying the firing didn't feel like a normal work decision at all. It came across more like a warning shot, a message sent loud and clear to anyone still there, showing what could happen if they spoke honestly about working conditions to anyone outside the organization. And the part that really hits hard about that story is what it suggests about the kind of standard being enforced inside Turning Point right now. Because think about what Aubrey was allegedly let go for. A secondhand version of a private conversation she had with someone she personally knew about the general mood at work. That is not espionage. Not even close. That is not some major leak or exposure of sensitive internal plans. That is just a person doing what people naturally do, talking through stress and discomfort from a tough work environment with someone they trust. And if the sources are right, saying Erika's team pushed staff straight back into work without giving them real time to recover after Charlie's assassination, that adds even more weight to this situation. No real space to process anything, no proper acknowledgement of the loss, no time to deal with the emotional impact of losing someone they had built their careers around. So of course people were going to talk. Of course they would open up to partners, friends, family, and even people they casually met during the day about what they were dealing with, the pressure, the confusion, and everything shifting around them. That is not betrayal. That is basic human behavior. And treating it like something punishable raises serious questions about how loyalty is being defined by the people now in charge of that organization. Candace Owens also stepped in and described what she believes has been happening inside Turning Point, and the way she put it instantly grabbed attention. She publicly labeled the internal environment with a term she called the Scottsdale witch trials, and that label stuck hard because the situation being described does not sound like a normal workplace handling staff issues. It comes across more like a political style operation, where people are being pushed out based on where they stand, not just how they perform. Candace explained that executives were allegedly pulling staff into private offices and putting them on the spot, directly asking where their loyalty stands, asking if they are with Erika, if they support the current direction, making it very clear what kind of answer is expected. That is not a standard review, not even close.
Turning Point executive that his daughter was good friends with a girl that worked at Turning Point way back when in high school. They had spoken about Turning Point since Charlie's assassination, and that, this was told to him by his daughter. And the Turning Point executive, of course, asked, well, what's the employee's name? And the Uber driver allegedly said, Aubrey. Aubrey who? Aubrey Leitch. And the story was presented to me as one of the reasons for my
That feels more like a loyalty test. And those kinds of moments usually do not happen in places where leadership feels secure. They happen when there is tension at the top, when the people in charge are worried about what others might know, worried about what could get out, and worried about who might decide to speak if the moment comes. And then there is another situation that got a strong reaction from people watching all this unfold. One report claims that Turning Point's in-house legal counsel actually showed up at a former employee's personal home to inform her that she had been let go, which only added more intensity to everything already being said, and it did not stop there. It is also being claimed that she was told on the spot not to delete anything from her devices and to hand over her company laptop immediately. That kind of intense, legal-heavy approach, especially showing up at someone's home instead of handling it through normal professional channels, sends a very strong message. It suggests that whoever made that call was not treating this like a routine firing at all. It looks more like a damage control move, like they believed the situation had to be locked down fast, not handled in a standard way. Then there is another situation that people keep bringing up. A young woman reportedly thought she was being called in for recognition, maybe even a bonus, after putting in serious work during AM Fest and continuing that effort through everything that happened after Charlie's death. But instead, she allegedly walked straight into being fired. No explanation, no context, no clear reason why someone who had been working that hard was suddenly out. And what makes it even more intense is what she reportedly started to suspect afterward. Based on the exact timing and how it seemed to connect to a private message she had sent the night before, where she expressed doubts about Erika's leadership, She began to wonder if employee devices were being monitored. If that suspicion has any truth behind it, then what is being built inside Turning Point USA starts to look very different. Not just an organization with strong leadership, but something much more controlled. It starts to feel like a surveillance-style environment, where even private conversations with trusted coworkers could carry real consequences. And that leads to the big question people are now asking more and more. What exactly is being kept so tightly under wraps here? Because when you really look at everything being described, the level of control, the speed of the firings, the loyalty questioning, the claims of device monitoring, even legal teams showing up at people's homes, it does not look normal at all. That does not match how a stable organization operates. That looks like pressure building behind the scenes. That looks like leadership worried that the wrong person might say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and something slips out that cannot be contained. And what is interesting is that multiple sources keep pointing back to the same issue again and again, a financial audit that Charlie reportedly started before his death, an investigation into Turning Point's finances during the time Erika's role inside the organization was expanding. This audit was said to already be underway, moving forward, until everything suddenly changed. Sources are claiming that once Erika took control, that audit was shut down almost immediately, which raises even more questions. Because if everything in those financial records is solid, if every decision checks out, then an audit is not a threat at all. You let it continue, you show the results, and you prove everything is transparent. But if that process was stopped early, if something Charlie personally pushed for was cut off before any clear findings came out, then people are naturally going to wonder what it might have uncovered. And when you line that up with the reported firings, the pressure on staff, and the claims about monitoring communication, it starts to look like a bigger effort to make sure the people who might know something are not in a position to say anything. There is also another claim circulating right now, and this one pushes the situation into an even more serious direction, one that needs to be handled carefully. Because this part of the story is serious enough that it has to be framed the right way. There are sources and online voices claiming that Turning Point USA may have been influenced or quietly guided by foreign intelligence interests, but that claim has not been independently confirmed and should be treated carefully for what it is. Right now, it stands as a theory being discussed online, not a proven fact. But the reason it keeps spreading instead of fading out is because it is being tied to a former employee's account that people keep pointing back to. And one specific detail from that account is what really grabs attention and keeps people talking. According to this former employee, during his very first week at Turning Point USA, new hires were invited out by senior staff for what was supposed to be a relaxed welcome event. On the surface, it looked like a normal introduction, nothing unusual. But he claims it quickly turned into something very different. At some point during that gathering, new employees were reportedly pulled aside one by one and asked a direct question. And here is where it gets strange. Because the question was not about conservative policy, not about constitutional views, not about the organization's mission or the movement Charlie originally built. Instead, according to that same account, the question they were asked caught them completely off guard. It was not about their beliefs, not about their experience, not even about why they wanted to be part of the organization. They were allegedly asked where they stood on a completely different kind of issue, something that did not clearly connect to the public image or stated goals of Turning Point USA at all. And the way it was asked, one-on-one, quietly, made it feel even more serious. The former employee claimed it did not feel like a casual question either. It felt calculated, like the answer actually mattered in ways that were not being explained up front. And that is the detail that has people paying attention. Because if true, it suggests that something else could have been influencing how people were being evaluated behind the scenes. Now, to be clear, this is still just one person's account being shared and discussed. There is no confirmed evidence publicly backing this up, and it should be treated with caution. But when you line This story up with everything else being claimed, the firings, the pressure on staff, the questions around internal control, it adds another layer that people are struggling to ignore, and it leaves one more uncomfortable question hanging in the air. What were they really trying to find out from the very beginning? Because if those kinds of questions were really being asked behind closed doors, then it changes how people start to view everything else that followed. It suggests that decisions inside the organization may not have been as straightforward as they appeared on the surface. And that brings the focus right back to the present, where the biggest concern now is not just what already happened, but what might be about to come out next. Because remember, multiple sources are saying someone from Erika's inner circle is preparing to speak publicly. Not a random outsider, not someone disconnected, but someone who has been close for years and who reportedly knows exactly how key decisions were made behind the scenes. If that person actually steps forward and shares detailed information, it could shift this entire situation overnight. Because insider accounts carry a different level of weight, especially when they come from someone who was directly involved. And it would also make it much harder to dismiss everything as rumors or speculation. Once first-hand details start lining up with the patterns people are already pointing out, the conversation changes fast. So now, all eyes are on whether that moment actually happens. Because if it does, this situation could move from quiet discussion into something much bigger, something that forces real answers instead of more questions. And if that moment really happens, it is not just going to be another headline that fades out in a day or two. It could trigger a chain reaction that pulls in far more attention than anything that has come out so far. Because once someone from the inside starts laying out specific details, timelines, conversations, decisions, it becomes a lot harder for people to ignore or explain it away, especially if those details match what multiple others have already been hinting at. At that point, it stops being scattered claims and starts forming a clearer picture that people can actually follow. And that is when pressure starts building from all sides, not just online, but from media, partners, and anyone connected to the organization. It also puts current leadership in a tight position, because responding means addressing very specific claims, not just general criticism. And staying silent only makes people more suspicious about what might be true. And there is another layer to this that cannot be overlooked. The more attention this gets, the more likely it is that additional voices step forward, people who may have stayed quiet before, but start to feel like they are not alone anymore. That is usually how situations like this grow. One person speaks, then another. Then more details start connecting, and suddenly, what looked controlled at first begins to open up in a way that is hard to contain. And that is where everything stands right now. A situation that started with quiet claims and behind-the-scenes tension is now building into something much bigger, with more eyes watching and more questions being asked every single day. Because when you stack it all together, the reported firings, the pressure on staff, the loyalty questioning, the stories about internal control, and now the possibility of an insider speaking out, it paints a picture that people cannot just ignore. At this point, it is not just about what has already come out. It is about what could drop next. Because if even a portion of these claims are confirmed, it could force a level of transparency that the organization has not had to deal with before. And until that happens, the speculation is not slowing down anytime soon. People are watching closely, connecting details, and waiting to see who steps forward and what they are willing to say. So now it comes down to this: does everything stay behind closed doors? Or does something finally break into the open? If you have been following this story, make sure you stay locked in. Hit like, subscribe, and share this so more people can see what is unfolding. And drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one situation where every detail matters.